Well, with Mark chapter 3, we're going to get into some fun stuff, and Jesus is going to be asked the question, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? How can we do things on the Sabbath that is different than what the Jewish traditions have taught? They have a lot of strictness around their Sabbath day observance, probably too strict according to Jesus' responses. So let's get in and get things started. Okay, verse 1. And he entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man there which had a withered hand. If you remember, we've probably familiar with the stories. We went through Matthew. Christ and his disciples went to a synagogue on Sunday, and while there, they noticed there's a gentleman with a withered hand. Verse 2, they watched him, and whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. So everybody else is wondering, is Jesus going to heal this guy? So already people know who Jesus is and what he is about. He's healed people. Is he going to heal this guy? So verse 3, and he saith unto the man which had the withered hand, stand forth. And he said unto them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill? But they held their peace. And so that they don't want to answer. That's because they don't want to self-incriminate. They don't want to have their response used against him, basically. Now in verse 5 he says, and when he had looked round about on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he saith unto the man, stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored whole as the other. Now realize this is a healing that's happening. Christ, as far as we know, isn't putting his hands on the guy. He hasn't offered like a blessing on this gentleman or anything like that. Maybe he said like a silent prayer in his mind about it or something, but the guy suddenly is healed. Verse 6, and the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. Now, these are the Herodians. You might be asking, who is that? Okay, remember Herod's family is the ones that are ruling the Judean area. There's Herod the Great, and then he had 4 sons, and so Herod the Great's empire that he was given by Rome, basically, as kind of a, hey, you're an influential guy in the area. We're going to give you this place to rule over, because you scratch my back, I scratch your back politically, kind of a thing. So when Herod passes on, he gives his empire to his 4 sons and to break it up. That's, Philip and the Herod Jr., basically, and Herod Antipas, those things. And so they get it split up, and they're taking, so that it's still controlled by the Herod family, basically. I think we're getting almost close to third generation in this too. So this is like the family that kind of has a lot of clout and power in the whole area, as far as ruling as a middleman in between Rome and the Jews. Now they're trying to figure out, so this is the Jewish leaders are working with the civil leaders to figure out how can we create a situation that allows us to get rid of Jesus by death, basically. How can we destroy him, get him out? Which is funny, because if you think about it, Christ's question to everybody back in, verse 4, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days, or to do evil? What did the Pharisees do? They went out to find a way to destroy Jesus. They did evil on the Sabbath day, thinking that they were doing right, but they're promoting their own opinion and justifying themselves. So verse 7, but Jesus withdrew himself with his disciples to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him from Judea, and from Jerusalem, and from Idumea, and from beyond Jordan, and they about Tyre and Sidon, a great multitude, when they had heard what great things he did, came unto him. So this is lots of outlying areas and close areas, a lot of people coming to him. Now, when you look at this word in verse 8, Idumea, this is the Old Testament name for Edom. So more mountainous areas as well. So there's all these areas that they're naming that people are coming to learn of Jesus. I mean, his fame is getting out there. Verse 9, and he spake to his disciples that a small ship should wait on him because of the multitude, lest they should throng him. For he had healed many, insomuch that they pressed upon him for to touch him, as many as had plagues. So again, they want to touch him. They know if I just touch the hem of his garment, I can be healed. This guy's amazing. He has power and he's healing people. So they are pushing in on him. It's probably getting a little too much at this point for Jesus and his disciples. But verse 11 he says, and unclean spirits, when they saw him, fell down before him and cried, saying, Thou art the Son of God. Now, this is interesting because these are devils that are claiming and acknowledging who he is. They know who he is. They're proclaiming Jesus. Now, what's interesting is that's not what they need to be doing at this point. So while that sounds like a good thing, like, oh my gosh, these guys have devils, but they know who he is. That's amazing. That's like a testimony of who he really is. The problem is he doesn't want that kind of recognition at this point. He hasn't really gotten too far into his ministry yet. So he says here in verse 12, and he straightly charged them that they should not make him known. So again, he's like, hey, hold on. This is too early. So in a way, what the devils are doing is basically ruining Christ's life by pronouncing him. So it's kind of it sounds like it's a good thing, but in reality, it's not, because that's going to promote him to be seen as the son of the God. He's not just a son of God, but a son of the God. That would be blasphemy, for one thing, in Jewish law. And that would be positioning him as like a god, and so it would cause Christ a lot of problems, and he would probably result in a premature death, which is what the devils want. They want him out of there. Verse 13, and he goeth up into a mountain, and calleth unto him whom he would, and they came unto him. So that might sound a little strange. Like, he goes up into this mountain, there's this huge group of people following, and he calls to him those whom he desired. If you look at that in the Greek translation, under the footnote. So he brings up his disciples, okay? He had this core group, not the multitudes, just his core group. Verse 14, and he ordained 12 that they should be with him, that he might send them forth to preach, and to have power to heal sicknesses, and to cast out devils. So he's got his 12 disciples. They're now ordained as apostles of Jesus Christ. He's pulled those people together. So now we're going to go through the names of these disciples, or these apostles, I should say. Verse 16, and Simon he surnamed Peter. Now we don't hear the story. We learn in the book of Matthew how that works out. But here in Mark, we just hear Simon he surnamed Peter. Now there again, you have to remember, Mark is kind of skimming over a lot of stuff. That's why Mark's the smallest of the Gospels, because he kind of just hits a bunch of highlights on some things, dives deep in a couple things, but goes quickly over a lot of stuff. Verse 17 here, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, and he surnamed them Boanerges, which is sons of thunder. So the Lord conferred this name or title on them, meaning sons of thunder. So they were passionate guys. They're even in The Chosen, they try to depict these two as pretty passionate for what Christ is doing and excited about it. Getting that name Sons of Thunder that's the nickname that they were given, basically, because of their boisterousness, their passion for this work. Verse 18, and Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas and James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus and Simon the Canaanite and Judas Iscariot, which also betrayed him, and they went into an house. So they're all together. They were up in the mountains. Christ called people to him, and now they're heading into a house. Verse 19 talks about that. So this is, if you're following along with the chosen, James, the son of Alphaeus, is little James. Simon the Canaanite, Judas Iscariot, most of these names you've probably heard because they've used them. They've well established these characters in the chosen. Simon the Canaanite might actually be Simon the Zealot. He's the guy that has, if you're again watching the chosen, he's the guy that is the more military-minded guy, the one that can handle a knife really well. That's, if anybody needs security, they go to Simon because he knows what he's doing. Let's see, verse 20, and the multitude cometh together again, so that they could not so much as eat bread. So again, all the people are still following him. Verse 21, and when his friends heard of it, they went out to lay hold on him, for they said, he is beside himself. Now this is interesting. Mark is the only gospel who claims this here, okay? He claims basically Jesus's family thought he might be crazy. So technically it would be Jesus's half brothers and half sisters, the other children of Mary that she has after him. This is interesting that out of all the gospels, Mark is the one that says that Jesus's family thought he was crazy. He was beside himself. They're like, oh, Jesus is at it again. Oh no, he's got some crazy following going on, this weird stuff going on. Oh no, we gotta go deal with him. And this is interesting because when we look at like the trend of what Mark is writing about, Mark has a higher tolerance for problems and challenges. He kind of paints a lot of the apostles as struggling, more so than the other gospels do. He even paints this idea. So Mark has a tendency to kind of challenge what we'd call norms. We want to see Christ as amazing and godly and perfect, but yet even Christ's family thought he was crazy, according to what Mark is saying. So Mark's willing to put out some unpopular ideas in his gospel. Verse 22, and the scribes which came down from Jerusalem said, he hath Beelzebub, and by the prince of the devils casteth he out devils. So they're looking still again for justification. What's going on? How can he cast out devils? How can he do these miracles? And so their best way to think about this is to say he has a devil himself. Devils can control devils. That seems like a 1 + 1 = 2 type analogy. So he must have a devil. He must be of the devil if he can control devils. Now, if you notice, they're avoiding in their logic that maybe he's of God and can control devils because God is mightier than the devil. They're not going to that logical point because that would mean they'd have to admit that if Christ is of God, then we should probably follow him. And his teachings are different than what we have been doing, and so that would disrupt the whole power structure and control that they have in Jerusalem. And they would probably need to give up their power to Christ, to Jesus, if he is controlled or coming, if he has come from God and has godlike powers. So they can't go to that logical level because again, that would make the assumption that they were wrong. They were the ones in the wrong. He's in the right. They want to stay in the right, but justify against getting rid of him. So that's where they get to this logical point of, well, he must be a part of the devil then. Because if that is true, which is a huge assumption, then they're on the right and he's on the wrong. You see how this is how a lot of times people think. We have to justify. And sometimes we're willing to limit the amount of information we take in because we're justifying an opinion. We're not searching for the real truth. This is probably one of the best classical things you can look at between what most of the scribes and Pharisees do and what people like Nicodemus or some of the other ones do. There's a couple of them that end up going towards Christ, but most of them don't, because again, this is the challenge. Are we seeking to justify where we are at, Or are we seeking to know the truth? Because to know the truth, we have to be willing to admit that what we know right now might not be completely accurate. We might be in the wrong. We have to be willing to be that vulnerable in order to understand the truth. So that's what's this challenge with these scribes. They don't want to know the truth. They want to keep their power. They want to keep their position, but find a justification that allows them to stay in power and get rid of and hate Jesus. That's a whole different perspective than what really is the truth. Now, this is a great lesson for us in our life, because as we strive to seek truth, these are the things we have to think about. How can we let go? How can we be vulnerable with our own beliefs to be willing to learn more? Sometimes and this is something we all do at different times in our life, but what are the things that you believe about religion that might not be true? Regardless of which church you're a member of, you probably have some beliefs and ideas that aren't 100% true. They could be cultural, but they're not doctrinal. So we need to be willing to let go of these things so that we can seek more truth. That's a very important part of what can we do to understand the truth better. And if we're going back to like a justification, or not so much justification, but what is evidence of this? In the Book of Mormon, Alma chapter 32 talks about the idea of learning truth from the standpoint of planting a seed. And if you've ever grown a garden or had a farm, you plant a seed. You have no idea if that seed's going to grow or not. You hope it is, but you are open for the possibility that it might not grow. So there's open to doubt. That's part of learning truth, is being open to doubt that you might be right or you might be wrong. So that's this challenge here, basically. In verse 23, continuing on with this, and he called them unto him and said unto them in parables, how can Satan cast out Satan? And if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan rise up against himself, he be divided, and he cannot stand, but hath an end. So even that, you realize that they're looking at Christ is he understands what they're thinking, the logic they're trying to justify with, and he basically points out one of the logical fallacies. That can Satan cast out Satan? That sounds like a house divided. And a house divided cannot stand. It's not going to work. It's going to crumble and fall. So it would not be in Christ's interests, or it would not be in Satan's interest, to counteract himself. He doesn't want to counteract himself because he wants to keep furthering himself forward. But that's what Christ is talking about as well. He's going to hurt his chances. Why would he do that? That doesn't make sense. Now, verse 27, no man can enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he will first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil his house. If you're going to break into somebody's house and you realize that somebody in there is very strong, very athletically capable, maybe they're a person who's been in the military, you're breaking into like a Marine's home or somebody like that, you realize that you've got to nullify them first, or you think they may have a gun, so we've got to get to them before they get to their guns, kind of an idea. So that's what he's saying here, is that's like this idea of you've got to get this person nullified so that you can do what you want to do, overpower them and take their stuff. So that's going to be the problem. So verse 28, now verily I say unto you, all sin shall be forgiven unto the sons of men, and blasphemies wherewith soever they shall blaspheme. But he that shall blaspheme against the Holy Ghost hath never forgiveness, but is in danger of eternal damnation. Now these verses sound like, it sounds like this conversation is all over the place. Like, why would Christ just suddenly start spouting all this stuff off? Now, again, Mark's taking stuff, he's putting teachings in here, but he's not giving us some of the background behind some of these teachings and what's going on. So we want to think about these and realize again, if we harmonize the Gospels, some of these are different contexts, and Mark's just kind of lumping it all together. Verse 30, because they said, he hath an unclean spirit. So it could be that kind of, verse 30 kind of wraps all this together. It could be that this is one big conversation, but it feels like it's, again, all over the place. This could be something that has been debated for days between Christ and these Pharisees, basically, and the scribes. But again, there's probably a lot in between these verses that Mark's not giving us. Now, verse 31, there came then his brethren and his mother, and standing without, sent unto him, calling him. So they came together, but then they were apart from him, and then they called to him to come over to him. Verse 32, and the multitude sat about him, and they said unto him, behold, thy mother and thy brethren without seek for thee. So he's got this multitude that he's teaching these things to. But so this is a little bit of context that might help us with that previous conversation. But then they're like, oh, look, hey, Jesus, your brethren, your apostles, and your mother are here. And verse 33, and he answered them, saying, who is my mother or my brethren? And he looked round about on them which sat about, and said, behold, my mother and my brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of God, the same is my brother, and my sister, and my mother. Now, this is kind of a thing that's really interesting, that he delineates out not just brothers, but he delineates out sisters. So he's not just saying, only, if you do the will of my Father, only men can come to me and do my will. He is saying women can do the will and come to him as well. So he's using this experience of the apostles and his mother coming to see him while he's teaching as a way to teach the people that if you follow me, I will count you as my brother and my sister. And mother, he adds in there as well, since she's there with him also. So some fascinating teachings that it's nice that he delineates out men and women can come to Christ. He puts them on an equal playing field there. In fact, he even mentions mother, which is another designation for women as well. So there's these opportunities to come to follow Christ equally and to be with him. So let's jump to the next chapters. We continue the teachings of Jesus.